Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the worst movies of 2015. You know, every year there's lots of good movies that restore my faith in cinema and the power of cinema and the movies and the movie-going experience and make me feel proud to see as many movies as I do and experience movies and cinema and go to the multiplex. And then there are the movies that are the worst movies of the year, which make you regret all of that and feel like, why try when crap like this can exist? And, you know, there were some real stinkers this year. There's no doubt about it. And I saw a fair amount of really shitty movies this year. Now, my worst of lists are different from my best of lists in that I never do a top 10 worst movies of the year, mostly because I like to reserve a worst of the year list for the cream of the poop, I guess, or the cream of the crop, that are the worst, crappiest, shittiest movies that you wouldn't screen in front of an open flame. They are the worst of the worst. They are so horrible. And so I only want to reserve this space for those movies. And so it's kind of like the Oscars in that you never know how many picks they're going to have. I've never had more than 4. This year I have 5. 5 that I consider the worst films of the year. But I also have honorable mentions that I just have. So here are the honorable mentions for the worst movies of 2015. Hell and Back, Black Mass, Terminator Genesis, Aloha, and Taken 3. Now, I want to be honest, Taken 3 was on the bubble. Taken 3 got real close to getting on here. I don't know why I didn't, but I just felt like, Taken 3 wasn't top 5 bad. I guess if there was a 6. Now, a lot of people are going to note that Norm of the North is not on here. Norm of the North is a 2016 movie. However, if Norm of the North was on here, it would be number 1. But it's not because it doesn't qualify, because I'm talking about the worst movies of 2015. It's got a lock on 2016, I hope. I hope there's nothing worse than Norm of the North. But I can now move on to what I felt were the worst cinematic experiences I had, at least in terms of the movie I sat there and watched, in the year of 2015. And number 5, Pixels. There's a lot going against Pixels. Certainly its star is just there to get a paycheck. Its director is far past his prime. It stars the terrible trifecta of Adam Sandler, Josh Gad, and Kevin James. But you'd think that a film about a bunch of video game characters coming to life would at least be a fun movie, but it finds a corporate way to stop itself from doing anything that even resembles fun. Yes, this is a movie where the president is played by Kevin James. And it's a little sad to see Chris Columbus directing an Adam Sandler film. Technical wise, I guess it's directed better than most Adam Sandler movies. There's no way you could really tell this is a Chris Columbus movie unless I told you. He's just not really good at showing any sort of voice through his films. And with a star who clearly kind of doesn't want to be there and can't change his emotion from dear God, why is this movie stardom not ending? Pixels is a film that you should stay away from. Even if you like video games or you used to like Adam Sandler or you like the 80s, it's just a very empty black hole of apathy and nostalgia and just sucks all of that into it and gives you nothing in return. And so now number 4 is kind of infamous because of all the films on my list, it was the one that had the shortest theatrical run. It actually got pulled from theaters. This is number 4. It's kind of an obvious choice, but it was really bad. It is number 4, Jem and the Holograms. Name recognition is something that films have been named off of ever since basically film's been invented. It's something that brings the audiences in. It piques your interest, and especially if it's name recognition tied in with nostalgia, you're like, oh man, I haven't watched that cartoon or TV show or whatever in so long. I'd love to experience that all over again. Then when you get to Jem and the Holograms, it's kind of perplexing because clearly when you say Jem and the Holograms, you think of the cartoon show. Jem and the Holograms has nothing to do with Jem, the cartoon show. It's really just Jem in name only. Jem, the cartoon, had a great reputation as being the cartoon that was actually for girls that boys would actually watch as well because it had a great kind of soap opera energy to it. And this movie doesn't. This movie doesn't have a soap opera energy. It doesn't get the surreal qualities at all. It really doesn't have any of the things that made Jem fun. And instead has this kind of pseudo plot, I guess is the best way to describe it, that only comes in when it needs to to. Certain things just kind of happen and you're like, oh, there's a reason for that. Oh, there's not, but they still used it. Did they cut out the reason? I think there could be a cool gem movie, but this really is not the cool gem movie. This is like the Masters of the Universe movie where they had to make a ton of sacrifices to make it work as a movie, but instead they chose to do all this for artistic reasons, and it kind of becomes even more bullshit because you don't have like an earnest story about how they were trying to get it to work. You just have a bunch of stupid ego that completely failed them. That's kind of a lot worse and even goes against the whole idea of the movie of being true to yourself, because I think these people weren't even really true to the real selves of the property that they were adapting. They were just true to their stupid egos, which is probably a message this movie should have given you as well. Instead, they just want to give you the bloatedness of free expression that acts like it's some sort of genius. And number 3 is Alvin and the Chipmunks, The Road Chip. This movie is beyond terrible. I can't believe that this is a motion picture and that this is the 4th one. It looks like it was directed by fluorescent lighting at a Target. If fluorescent lighting at a Target became sentient, went to film school, kind of only watched sitcoms most of the time, slept through film history, then got a job as a PA, eventually worked his way up through the studio system, becoming an assistant director probably on the Squeakquel, slowly becoming a director, and then leading to directing Alvin and the Chipmunks, The Road Chip. It's a weird experience seeing this film. None of the kids or adults seem to like the movie at all. So it kind of was like being in a re-education camp, but nobody really gives a shit, and you're all just kind of there, and you're just biding your time till you either leave or die. It was hard to get through, and it's actually pretty short. If you like this movie, you're an idiot. It's a fucking horrible piece of garbage, and welcome to a life of enjoying Vaseline on toast and eventually dying an insignificant death because you do not matter, because you sat through something that just reached in and tried to take out a soul, but since you had no taste or had nothing interesting to devote to society, there was nothing there, and you've just walked on Earth as a meaningless shell, stealing from the Earth and eventually leading to the collapse of humanity. And now we're on to the top 2, and these really were painful to get through, more so than the other 3, which were pretty painful to get through. And number 2 is a video game adaptation, and I'm hoping this year is the year that we get better video game adaptation movies. I don't think we have as of yet, and they're kind of a staple of any worst list because they were handled so poorly. But this film exceeds even the poor quality of past video game adaptations to become a true terrible action movie. Even if we're not even talking about the video game thing, this is an awful, awful movie. Number 2 is Hitman Agent 47. This is a huge pile of shit, and there's really nothing redeeming about it. It is such a horrible action movie. It's so inept at what it's doing, and it's so boring. There's a certain point where you see people ripping off John Woo, and you wish you could see John Woo. Honestly, I wish I was watching 4th Generation rip off John Woo rather than this bullshit. This is a bad, bad, bad action movie. I do not like Hitman Agent 47. If you have any sense of a brain, you would not like this movie. This is a horribly boring film. It's one of the most boring action movies, and I'm supposed to go, whoa, wasn't that awesome? I didn't think, whoa, that was awesome. I thought, whoa, the credits are on, I need to get the fuck out. And then it had a mid-credit sequence, and I kind of turned around and thought, maybe I should go back. No, fuck this. And I walked out, and I still felt a little bad. It was like Stockholm Syndrome. Any part of this movie you like is just to deal with sitting through this horrible movie. It's not even good at being a low-level B action movie. It fails at being the bottom of the barrel. Somehow it's below the barrel, and it's that weird fungus mold shit that will like get you a weird disease. And my number 1 is probably obvious. It was another January animated film because it really was one of the worst, most horrible films. It's almost legendary in how bad it was, and that is my number 1 pick of the worst movie of 2015 is Strange Magic. Is a terrible, horrible turd of an animated movie, but it's also kind of an ambitious one that totally fails on those ambitions and helps make an already bland and terrible script and idea even worse somehow, not thinking about how to use these ambitious ideas for the story rather than just thinking like, hey, we're gonna reinvent the wheel, but not think about why they made the wheel that way in the first place. They don't really think about the impact their decisions are having on on the film or the audience who has unfortunately sat down to watch this horrible wreck and waste of time for thousands of animators to make. It uses pop songs and has the characters sing already established pop songs, which kind of harkens back to what George Lucas did with American Graffiti. American Graffiti was his first film that was a huge hit. Part of that was because of the soundtrack, and this is kind of harkening back to that, where you're using older pop songs to say things about the characters. Unfortunately, the soundtrack to Strange Magic is like the opposite of good soundtrack. Like, imagine you got a really good mixtape from somebody from the past, and you're like, man, I wonder if that guy made a mixtape now, what it would be like. And then you realize that guy's grown up and had a daughter, and she went off to college, but she left her iPod in the minivan, and he decided to listen to it and got really way too into it than he should have. That's kind of the soundtrack to Strange Magic. It's kind of Glee-ish, but like way worse than Glee somehow. It is just such a bad movie. It's so hard to watch. The songs are awful and terrible that they thought this could work on any level and relate to anyone, and anyone could really get into it, because there's just no way you really could. There's nothing to really like about this movie. It's just so awful and dividing and horrible, and afterwards I think my brain hurt just because it felt bad for the rest of me for having to sit and be exposed to that movie. It's interesting to do something different. It's interesting to be ambitious, and I hope more filmmakers are. But when it all comes together to make a really bad, terrible movie, you know your ambition has gone awry, and you've ended up making a thing that was worse than the copies and copies of a genre that you're trying to fight against. So it's really doing the reverse of what you wanted to, and you've just made a more terrible movie than any of those films could even possibly imagine to be. And that is what Strange Magic has done, and has infected my soul with being a terrible movie. So that was my worst movies of 2015. I'd say I hope 2016 isn't this bad, but I already know it can possibly be worse. So I hope this year sort of works out better than the rest of this list, I guess. Now I've completed my best of, my worst of. Hopefully there won't be 5 this year. I can hope for that, even if I know it can get worse. I know that maybe there won't be 5 next year. Maybe there'll only be 2. There'll only be 2, and it'll be much shorter video, and I will be spared watching such horrific trash. But until then, I hope you come back to hear me both talk about horrific trash and other movies that are much better than the 5 on here, hopefully. And if you'd like to talk about the worst movies of 2015, then comment below in the comments, and even write what you thought a film that I should have included, or were like, how could you put Gem and the Holograms? It was a feminist critique on modern society, and I'm a stupid asshole. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you next time I make a list or any sort of video, and I hope you didn't have to watch all 5 of these movies like I did. And as always, and subscribe if you would like to.